Thank you, Doris. Don't usually get applause. I'll be arguing in front of the Nebraska Supreme Court, and they don't applaud you. They just bombard you with questions. But I welcome questions, and I hope to get them. Okay, yeah, so South Dakota is a big state, it's a beautiful state, it's a powerful state. Don't let anyone else tell you anything different. And when I was a younger lawyer back in the 80s, I had a case involving double pledging of hogs in Nebraska. And I took a private plane up, and on the way back, we buzzed Mount Rushmore. And I tell you, that was the highlight of my career with that law firm, really. But I'm a 1975 graduate of Omaha Creighton Prep, and Gutzon Borglum was a 1984-1985 graduate of Creighton Prep. Creighton Prep is run by the Society of Jesus, and the founder of the Society of Jesus was Ignatius Loyola, Saint Ignatius Loyola. And so I appreciated that first speaker talking about God. And Saint Ignatius said many things, but one of his favorite quotes is, "Pray as if everything depended upon God, and work as if everything depended upon you." And that has always resonated with me, and I imagine that's the way you've run your lives. So this is Begley's law. Catastrophic anthropogenic global warming is a prediction about events in the far distant future based upon corrupt data and flawed models created by people who have a financial incentive in the result. So, I mean, just on that basis alone, it's a scam. So I know you all follow the weather closely because your business is important. I mean, that's important to your business. So how many times has the weatherman been wrong about the weather a week away or a month away? So how in the world are these people so confident about predicting the climate for the entire planet in the year 2100? Dr. James Clauser won the Nobel Prize in Physics, and he has just come out and said a few years ago that he doesn't think CAGW is real. But he really paid a price. He got, they took speaking engagements away from him and tried to cancel him, but you know, it wasn't all that effective, let's put it that way. But he was at a position in his career where he could take that. But if you're a young person in the world of the academy, you know, that's a tough deal. So I believe Clauser, who won the Nobel Prize in Physics, before I believe all these other people who have a financial incentive to, you know, churn out these academic studies. So the foundations of the scam, scientific. Michael Mann's hockey stick graph came out in 1999. And this really set the template, you know, really got things going. Now, holy cow, these carbon dioxide, if we don't, it's gone way up, and the temperature, and it's only going to get worse and worse and worse. Well, it turns out it was a completely wrong, fake. It's very technical on the data side, but you know, Mark Stein, who was guest host for Rush Limbaugh on the radio, called this man, Michael Mann, out, and he got sued, and it went on forever and ever. But there's no question about it that Mann's hockey stick is wrong. Oh, and this guy claimed he won the Nobel Prize, and the Nobel Committee had to tell him, stop lying. So mass media, Al Gore, former vice president, Inconvenient Truth, 2006. Thesis, the global temperature is rising because of fossil fuels. Well, that's just false. He popularized the idea that there is a climate emergency. So this emergency has been going on since 2006. But what that does, it creates urgency in people's mind. You know, many salespeople, you know, they always be closing. which is a reference to David Mamet's Glengarry Glen Ross. But that's a technique in rhetoric, and so that's what the Greens and the left have done. So he said, Gore said back in 2016, there will be a 20-foot rise in sea levels in the near future because Greenland and Antarctica are going to melt. And he also said, he made all sorts of predictions. They were all wrong. But, you know, nobody ever goes back and calls them out. And the legacy media is constantly attributing bad weather events. Well, they attribute everything to global warming. And this morning I was reading the comments in the Washington Post, and shamefully, some of those people in the comment section were attributing that terrible flood in Texas to global warming. They just never quit. That's another one of my corollaries. The left never quits. Okay, legal. This is really, it's in the overall picture, it's kind of a small point, but it was a big point where the Supreme Court said 5-4 in U.S. Massachusetts that the EPA could define carbon dioxide as a pollutant under the Clean Air Act. And that caused all sorts of ramifications. And it was 5-4, John Paul Stevens, the late John Paul Stevens, appointed by President Ford, not a good decision. So the Inflation Reduction, the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, really codified the endangerment finding, and that allowed them to do all sorts of things with the net zero, which right away, January 20th, President Trump said, EPA, I want you to look at that. Lee Zeldin, bammo, March 12, 2025. Legally, that's a big deal. So the federal courts can't be, you know, imposing net zero on people. So, so this is from levelized cost of energy. So this narrative has been put out by the Lazard firm, a firm on Wall Street, that wind and solar are the lowest cost. Well, that is absolutely wrong, because what they don't take into account, because wind and solar are intermittent, you've got to have reliable backup. And that's a real important point. Electricity, it's got to be balanced 24/7 between supply and demand. So if the wind's not blowing and the sun's not shining and you don't have backup power, you're out of luck, you know, as we saw in Spain, which I'll cover later. But the thing of it is, with wind and solar, you have to build an alternative power system, and you also have to build a whole lot of transmission. So if you've got, you know, a big wind farm in Knox County, Nebraska, how are you going to get those 600 megawatts out of Knox County down to Omaha and into the grid? Well, that involves a lot of power lines and a lot of spending. And one thing I want to say here is, your business, and it's an important business, you're not doing ranching like you did 20 years ago, and not like your parents or your grandparents did. One of the geniuses of America and capitalism is you've got to get economically efficient. And I don't want to point out any one particular vendor here, but Zoetis, I know, with the genetics, I mean, that's an important thing for your business here. Everything is. But the thing of it is, wind and solar is retrograde. It's going backwards. It's really Luddite is what it is. Yeah, the left says wind and solar are free. I learned from my physics teacher, Newtonian physics at Creighton Prep, there is no free lunch in the universe. Okay, they always say wind and solar are reliable. Well, they're reliably intermittent. Really what's going on here. Yeah, and so Michael Corleone, don't tell me that wind and solar are reliable, as it insults my intelligence and makes me very angry. I think right after he said that, he had somebody off or hit. So I'm from Omaha, Warren Buffett. I followed him really for a long time, but not closely enough. His son Peter is like a year or two younger than I am. And he said recently, I think it was at the last meeting, scamming has always been a part of the American scheme. seen. And it's really up to you as business people and citizens to be alert to scams, to realize you're being scammed. So, like I said, I'm a graduate of Creighton University, and they had Dr. James Hansen from Iowa. He was one of the early gurus on, the Earth's going to burn up, and he was, when was that, 1988? I think they turned the air conditioning off when he testified before Congress. He was sweating like a pig, if you've ever seen the video. And he says, NASA is 99% confident. And that leads into this scientific consensus. They constantly do this appeal to authority. We are the scientists. We are so smart. We got our PhDs. Well, you got to look at what they're really saying and what their opinion is based on. And he said, greenhouse gases are going to kill us. And so he spoke at Creighton, and he put up this slide, and I laughed, showing the Statue of Liberty underwater, which is not going to happen. And he stuck with his assertion that the ice caps and the ice sheets are melting, but he didn't give a date. When you're running a scam, that's really important. So Begley, as Begley is, I get up and I said, your models have been mostly wrong for 30 years. Why should anyone believe you? And his response was, my prediction about future events were as certain as the law of gravity. Roll over, Newton, tell Einstein the news. I mean, he was really shameless, and he was not an impressive guy. But he scared these undergrads to death. This one undergrad gets up and says, oh, are we all going to die? And he said, well, no, not right away, but it's still an emergency, and I'm, choking on it. So I could not have written this talk without David Mamet. And he is the world's expert on con games. And he just came out with this book, The Disenlightenment. I highly recommend it to you. And if you don't have any other takeaway from this speech, take a look at these movies. House of Games, Wag the Dog, Spanish Prisoner, The Heist. I like The Heist with the late Gene Hackman and House of Games. And that's how you really learn how a con game runs. Fun fact, his first wife was the star of House of Games, and his second wife was the star of the Spanish Prisoner and The Heist. So, but I mean, it wasn't nepotism. I mean, they were very good actresses. So, Mamet on the confidence game. The con man only works his game on marks likely to succumb to the lowest cost in energy and time. The do-gooder always becomes the tool or the prey of the rapacious. And the rapacious here are the Wall Street and politicians. The do-gooder has advertised himself as one who is willing to pay for the right to refrain from doing the math. That's an important point. Refrain from doing the math. Your business, you wouldn't be in business if you didn't do the math all the time. But a lot of these people, well, actually 48% of the population, they don't want to do the math. And the math is bad. So who are the marks? Well, half the population. So I was at the Texas Book Festival in Austin, and Samantha Power, who was President Obama's secretary to the UN, she had written this book all full of doom and gloom, and there was this beautiful undergrad from the University of Texas, and she gets up and says, oh, how can I bring children into this world? Well, Samantha Power kind of danced around, and she said, well, you're allowed to bring children in the world. It's not really going to be that bad. It was a shameful performance by that woman. So Mamet on the con game run by politicians. Global warming is imaginary, so the politician can endlessly exploit the issue because there is no danger of a cure. Political language asserts that you have the power. Liberal thought exhorts the receptive to change, save the world. An individual is powerless to save the world, but as a group or tribe, And identity politics, you can do it. And another thing about David Mamet is super interesting. Well, our greatest playwright, one of our best directors and screenwriters, and he was a liberal for a long time, but around 2000, 2006, he wrote something in the Village Voice of the Nation, I forget, liberal publication. He said, I'm quitting. And I've been brain dead this entire time. And he has educated himself by reading books of economics. Well, this Mamet's a genius guy and is now a very strong conservative. But the point of today is he has given me the clue as to how this confidence game has been run on the American public. And well, the whole world, really. Time starts now. The individual voter is using his power to save the world. I mean, so many people, they think they're, living lives of quiet desperation, but they can save the world by being against global warming. The mark realizes his power and can be manipulated by the huckster. The mark has been flattered out of his money, but with this thing, out of taxpayers' money. The big lie, okay, Joseph Goebbels, the minister of propaganda or whatever for the Nazis, invented it. And if you say something with enough power, we are the government, this is what we're telling you to believe, everybody believes this, your teachers are telling you, and you just bang, 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 repetition, the individual surrenders because disbelief is costly. You can get canceled, or your fellow college students and professors will give you all sorts of grief. And that is very much real. Like I said, I was super disappointed that Creighton invited well, I mean, it's an academic debate. We can have a debate in the marketplace of ideas. I'm all for that. But the bigger and the more absurd the lie, the bigger the sacrifice on the part of the citizen. This is happening right now in Europe. Believe it or not, they are setting up in London and other places. You can only drive within 20 minutes of your home. And if you go beyond that, you're penalized financially. And they're doing that on flights like within France. So, I mean, imagine in Nebraska and Iowa, you can only stay within 20 minutes of your home. That's not happening, But they are really set on that in Europe. So a recent poll, 48% of Americans believe that global warming poses a serious threat to their way of life now. And that just shows how powerful the big lie is. Okay, Mark Twain, new book about him by Ron Chernow. It's a big book. I haven't read it, but Twain, well, he really invented the American novel with Huckleberry Finn. That's not me talking, that was Ernest Hemingway. And he said how easy it is to make people believe in a lie and how hard it is to undo their work again. And then I'm a big movie person just because it can really express a lot of truths about human nature and American life. People believe in what they want to believe. And then people want to believe CAGW because they think they are making a difference and saving the earth from burning up. Well, people just want to believe it, whether it's true. And it's hard to look at the math and look at the other side of the story. And as a lawyer, I learned, and it's always the case, there are two sides to every story. But in our adversary system, the two sides, work against each other, and the truth is supposed to come out. And our side, or my side, I should say, the conservative side, hasn't been very effective in pushing back. Okay, Marcus Aurelius, one of the great men in human history, emperor of the Roman Empire, a good emperor and a philosopher, a Stoic philosopher. His book is Meditations. He thought it was going to be private, but it got published, and I would recommend that book to you. It's a short book. If someone can prove me wrong and show the mistake, my mistake in any thought or action, I shall gladly change. And we have lost that. We have lost that. And I seek the truth, which has never harmed anyone. The harm is to persist in one's own self-deception and ignorance. So that's a great quote that was written before Christ was born. So John Kenneth Galbraith, a famous liberal economist, well, I don't think he was particularly responding to Marcus Aurelius, but He knew human nature, and faced with the choice between changing one's minds and proving that there is no need to do so, almost everyone gets busy on the proof. And that reminds me of, who was the other guy? It'll come to me later. John Maynard Keynes, another famous economist, super famous economist. He said, when the facts change, I change my mind. What do you do, sir? So that all relates back to Marcus Aurelius. Let's look at the facts. So, okay, what's the total addressable market for the scam? 78 trillion, Wood & Mackenzie's, big consulting firm. Janet Yellen says 75 trillion. So I'm borrowing from the late Senator Everett Dirksen. A trillion here and a trillion there, and after a bit, it really adds up to real money. So the Wall Street and the Greens, they want this market. And right now, our U.S. federal debt is 36 to 37 trillion bucks. And I'll reference that a little bit later. So this was, if I have any real insight here, is the fatal flaw in the CAGW scam is predictions. You know, Al Gore and all these other people, Prince Charles, all of them, they said, oh, you got to act now because in year 1990, 2010, 2016, you know, the end of the world, oh, you know, the ice caps are going to melt, you know, we're able to go through the Arctic without icebreakers. And so, yeah, Gore said 2016. There have been at least 47 wrong climate disaster predictions since 1967. You would think if they were, you know, 0 for 47, people would wise up. I mean, you know, the University of Nebraska football team, if they went 0 for 47, that coach is fired. And same with Craig's basketball coach. That is just not, you know, that's the reality. That's performance. So Wall Street fixed the flaw. They were very, and this is not any kind of conspiracy. You know, it's like Michael Douglas said in the movie Wall Street, greed, for lack of a better word, is good. I mean, they realized where the money is. I mean, they didn't have some big meeting at Salomon Brothers or whatever, but they all want to make money. And so the way they solved it was the U.S. must achieve net zero by 2050. Forget about China and India, just the U.S. and the EU, or otherwise the Earth will burn up in 2100. That creates urgency, but the end date is far enough in the future. I'm not going to live to 2100. I don't think anybody in this room is. So the deal is we're going to spend billions and billions on net zero, but we're never going to find out if it worked because we'll all be dead, and we're not getting any refunds, and then it'll be piled on the federal debt. Okay, the context fallacy, part of the scam. So they say, okay, U.S., well, and EU have to achieve net zero, but they ignore China and India. They're building coal-fired power plants left and right there, you know, 94.5 gigawatts. And OPPD, I'm from Omaha, Public Power District. They're a small utility, but it's only 3.2. So one of the left's assertion is that, you know, another thing on the climate, okay, we got all this smoke coming out of Canada. Okay, it's a worldwide climate. You know, China and India, you know, they're putting all these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Why aren't they part of it? You know, why aren't they going to achieve net zero? So I asserted in an Amazon book review, might have been like 20 years ago, if climate change is so real, why aren't we bombing these Chinese coal-fired power plants? I mean, you follow the logic. You know, if carbon dioxide is a threat to mankind, we should do everything within our power to stop it, right? Well, Amazon, somebody complained, and so all of my book reviews, and there weren't that many of them, but they were just canceled, deleted, disappeared. But really, I mean, yeah. So Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. I can't say I read the book, but I've read in it. But one of his he really invented modern industrial capitalism. And okay, Nebraska and South Dakota, I'm a Nebraskan, we have a natural advantage in efficiently making food. Texas and Oklahoma, as much as they say they don't have such a good advantage like we do in terms of water and everything and the grass. And so the way economics work is Nebraska and South Dakota, we sell food to Texas and Oklahoma and the nation because we're economically efficient. And the oil and gas states, they've got the oil and gas there, and also North Dakota too, and they sell it to everybody else. That's the way the economy is supposed to work. And it's not supposed to work by taking valuable and scarce ag land and turning it to wildly inefficient production of electricity. It's really a cardinal sin in economics. I mean, that's one of the few things I learned at Creighton University. It's really a perversion of economics. I was shocked when Warren said this at the annual meeting. He owns, it's now Berkshire Hathaway Energy. It's now called Mid-American Energy, and they have a lot of power plants in Iowa and in Colorado and other states. He said, we never would have built those wind towers unless the federal government gave us those subsidies. I think it was at least 16 billion. And the way it works is, so he gets the 16 billion in tax credits, Berkshire Hathaway, and it used to offset the net income from Burlington Northern and Borsheim's and all the rest of them, Nebraska Furniture Mart. And but even with that, Berkshire Hathaway is one of the top U.S. corporate taxpayers in America. But Warren, to his credit, just said, we never would have bought those wind towers. And economists call that rent seeking. Okay, why can't we learn from Germany? Well, they are hard green over there. They have a long word for it, for their net zero policy. And they closed down their nuclear power plants. They're closing down their coal plants. And the result is that their electricity is 3 to 5 times higher than the U.S. average. And McKinsey, big consulting firms, they still got to spend more. And Germany is deindustrializing. I mean, companies, they can't afford electricity. Well, and there's the other thing, energy poverty. And this is a real thing. People in Europe, they have to choose between heating their homes and eating. And, I went to a Catholic school, and, we have to have some concern for the least fortunate of us. I mean, why are we starving these people? Because some rich urban liberals think, we got to save the planet in the year 2100. That is just wrong. Spain, April 28, 2025, all the power went out in the entire country. And they had, at that time, 78% of their grid was renewable. And that's what caused the blackout. And there's some spin that it wasn't really, but just from an engineering state or point of view, when you have the big coal-fired or oil or nuclear, there's a lot of inertia behind that. But all this intermittent wind and solar doesn't have the physical inertia, so it's a buffer. And and California, New York, and a lot of states, Massachusetts, they have net zero. They keep adding to the grid with intermittent and unreliable solar and wind. And that's why the cost goes up. And at the risk, in fact, the Department of Energy just gave out a warning saying we're getting close to blackouts because we got too much wind and solar in the grid. Okay, putting the scam together. The academics, hockey stick graph, ice caps are going to melt, yada, yada. Mass media constantly pounds this into people. And Mamet knows, that creates drama, that creates attention. New York Times says it, and all those people believe it. And the Wall Street and the developers gave campaign money to politicians. And this was the key thing, the subsidies. The net zero wind and solar is all about the tax subsidies. That's it. It's not about saving the planet. I have another saying. When somebody says it's not about the money, it's exactly about the money. And it's super easy. I was on the NRD, Natural Resources District Board in Omaha area. It's super easy to spend somebody else's money, that's for sure. So Wall Street scam. I'm the special Knox County attorney representing Knox County in a federal court case filed by a big wind company. And I have always, they wanted to spend $1.3 billion in Knox County building 155 wind towers, 600 to 650 feet tall. The Nebraska State Capitol is only 400 feet tall. And I've always used this 30% number, so I say 390 million, but it's more. I saw the Secretary of Treasury about 2 weeks ago on TV. He's a Wall Street guy, and he's seen these tax shelters pro forma, I'm positive. And he said 60 or 70% of the value in those projects is with the tax credit. So imagine your ranch, and you had 60 to 70% capital from Uncle Sam. I mean, the subsidy is completely outrageous. And the states like Minnesota, New York, OPPD, MPPD, they've imposed this net zero mandate. And the only way you can meet it is by adding more and more wind and solar. And here's another crazy thing. Imagine if the federal government gave you a guaranteed rate of return. So every time you bought some capital item, the federal government said, okay, we're going to guarantee you're going to make 5% on that. Utilities, this is from somebody who's knowledgeable in this industry, says the utility business is the only business in America is if you buy a new desk, that increases your profits. So there's really an incentive to enter into these capital projects, particularly when you're getting the tax credits on the other side. Okay, here's at the local level. The developer pays 3 to 5 times, maybe more, of the typical cash rent for the area to lease the property for 30 years for solar and wind. Local governments, they get tax revenue. Nebraska, that's, they call it the nameplate tax. Oh, yeah, that's another clever part. You know, they say the Knox County Norfolk Wind Project, 600 megawatts. That's if it's running. And it's not running all the time. So that's another deception, misrepresentation. So they finally doubled it or increased it to 33,500 per megawatt. And so the local governments, in Nebraska, the counties approve conditional use permits for wind and solar. And I was involved in one in Saunders County, and they had a public hearing, and the U10 assistant football coach was super excited about getting artificial turf for the U10 football team if Saunders County approved it. Well, the board wanted that. City of Village of U10 was opposed to it, and the chairwoman of the board, she was the one leasing her real estate to this company, making 3 to 5 times the normal cash rent, I'm sure with inflation increase. And she didn't vote, but the people in Saunders County, Nebraska were so upset they withdrew. She was recalled from office. And I was talking to then Governor Pete Ricketts. He was the one who told me about it because, you know, the local media doesn't cover stuff like that, unbelievably. But, you know, and I remarked to Governor Ricketts, I'm a lifelong Nebraska. I can only think of 4 or 5 successful political recalls in the whole state. So people were really angry about it. And that's the democratic point, the democracy point I want to make with you here today. Okay, here's a company, battery company. That's the new thing. And that's another fake thing. They only have like 4 hours worth of storage. And another point, just if the United States really achieved net zero, it would take up the entire land area of 2 Californias. I mean, that's so crazy. See, you got to play their way of thinking out. So this company wanted to build some batteries in Omaha, in OPPD's district. OPPD's lawyer, who's a college friend of mine, general counsel for OPPD, said, no, Nebraska law doesn't allow it. And we have clashed on net zero, but he was absolutely right on this. So this Elion goes to Lincoln, home of the University of Nebraska, and he says, oh, we want to build one here in Lincoln. And anyway, so I called them out. I'm going to end up suing the city of Lincoln because they're not following Nebraska law. You know, I have really held these people to account. Oh, and another sidebar here. It's carved over the Nebraska State Capitol. Watchfulness in the citizens is the salvation of the state. I got into this thing just because I'm conservative and I got interested in it, but nobody else was doing it. And so I jumped in Saunders County, and now I've been hired as Knox County attorney, special Knox County attorney to fight the federal court lawsuit. And I'm fighting a solar project in Lancaster County, and I'm going to sue the city of Lincoln over this battery thing. So Blue Stem Energy, okay, this was right before I was hired. I mean, the day I was hired in the afternoon. But this solar energy developer wanted to put in a big solar project in Knox County. And I read the Nebraska advance sheets, the opinions of the Court of Appeals and the Nebraska Supreme Court every week. And there's always something, at least to me, super interesting. And I had read this case, Heinrich versus Blue Stem Energy Solutions. And Heinrich was an early employee, had 12% equity, and they fired him. And Blue Stem, they're a smallish company that does wind and solar. So they fire him, and they say, your equity is worth $410,350. Well, he knows that's wrong. And so he sues, and he got $2 million from a jury. So the guy who owns Blue Stem, I mean, he was out to cheat his partner, former partner, an early employee, out of $1.5 million. So I get up and tell the county board, I didn't know him at that time, I said, these are people of low character. You do not have to do business with these people. And you know, I'm sure they were shocked. I mean, Begley came out of the blue. So Amish farmer spoke right after me. And he knew, and I don't know how he knew, that Goldman Sachs predicted, because I had read it like 2 weeks earlier, and I'm on the internet all the time. I don't know how this guy found out. Goldman Sachs said $1.3 trillion in federal tax credits by 2032. And some people say it's a whole lot more. And he gets up and says, I don't think a business model should be built on a fad. Well, he was absolutely right on both points, and the solar permit was turned down. So NextEra is a big company, public company, and again, people of low character, in my opinion. And they got convicted in Wyoming federal court. The assistant U.S. attorney is married to a classmate of mine, and he was the one who prosecuted it. And the Department of Justice, they were fined $8 million for killing at least 150 bald American eagles via wind turbine planes. And the Wildlife Service and whoever, they told them don't build them there. But they went ahead, and it was right in the press release, because they wanted to hit these deadlines to get these tax credits. So Rebecca Courgeois, she was, you know, out of Duke, a master of the universe, Wall Street, Goldman Sachs, and she is retired at age 49 with a fortune. And the reason why is, look at how this company has performed versus the S&P 500, but more importantly, look how it's compared to the ETF, the utility index. They have made a pile of money on wind and solar. So for them, they're loving those tax credits. So, okay, well, I talked a little bit about Knox County. County of 8,400 people, border South Dakota, right across from Yankton. And what they did was they slightly increased the setback requirements from 2,000 to 6,600 feet. And like I said, 1.3 billion, 150 wind turbines, 650 tall. And it would cover 47,200 acres. And what, in my opinion, you know, a federal court can't order somebody to give somebody a conditional use permit, but it was the weight of the economic damages of, they pled that they had spent $19.3 million getting ready to file this permit, and they had to spend another $5 million, and they claimed they had a property interest and yada yada. And anyway, so insurance company lawyer was going to defend the county. He told them they were going to lose, and so I got hired, and surprise, well, here it is. So this is the way, it's a carrot and stick approach with these developers. Landowners get money, county gets money, schools get money, and we give a little bit of money to your fire department. So we're heroes, we're great people. The stick is, Knox County, if you don't bend the knee, we are going to crucify you financially. And the plaintiff, the Big Win, they don't really want money from Little Knox County. They want that conditional use permit. And I'm up against a firm of 100 lawyers, 100 very good lawyers. And, but so far, well, the insurance company has refused to, they got a little bit of a, and this is all public record, understand. So I had to sue them to pay my fees, but Knox County's been paying my fees, and I'm grateful for it, and I've been able to compete with Big Win. So 5 causes of action. I filed a motion to dismiss. It's a little technical rather than an answer. So with the motion to dismiss, the rules are, if everything you say is true, you still do not state a cause of action. So you don't have to have a trial or even go further into discovery. Judge John Gerard, and I filed the motion for summary judgment, and all the counts were dismissed except for the Fifth Amendment cause of action. So I had some good success. And this is another important takeaway. There is no mechanism under Nebraska federal law that prevents Knox County from banning commercial wind farms, and I would add solar developments, so long as there is a conceivable or hypothetically rational reason to do so. I don't think, and I had never even really thought about it in that way. I mean, a lot of counties have done moratoriums or increased setback requirements, but just do an outright ban. And your counties can do it. And I'll add, Belfort County, South Dakota, they have some wind farms, and one of the commissioners came down to Knox County and said, "We regret it." I mean, counties that have had these wind and solar farms, they regret them in retrospect for a lot of reasons. So Knox County on June 11, 2025, banned them. I wrote it. 18 good reasons to ban large-scale commercial wind projects. One reason, stop federal deficit spending. If the federal government is $37 trillion in debt, it is nuts to add another $1.3 trillion on, and it's not doing any good. The only thing, it lines the developers' pockets, and the engineers and the accountants and the lawyers and the developers in Wall Street. It's so economically inefficient. And again, you're a lot more economically efficient than the way you ranched 20 years ago. That's the way of American capitalism. That's how progress happens in this country. So why are we going backwards on electricity? It's just crazy. So now they want to amend their complaint, and so I'm in it again. So one big beautiful bill. This is from Alex Epstein, who's a real good guy on this. And there's going to be obviously more litigation. The big beautiful bill, it was a mixed bag. I mean, they tried to cut it back. And the Greens, they had 16 Republican congressmen in the House, including Omaha's own Don Bacon, saying, we want these green things to keep going. And so there was a compromise, I would say. All they need to do is commit 5% of an expected project to, just buying the capital equipment, and it could go on another 4 years. But just the other day, the president and the Department of Treasury are going to issue some regulations to construe what is the construction threshold. And that always happens with any kind of IRS law. So there'll be lawsuits over that. But the upshot here is the next 4 years, there's going to be a big push in Nebraska and South Dakota and other states to get these projects going and built. And they're really going to press. And that's where you come in as people, good South Dakota citizens. Politicians are and should be responsive to voters. That was certainly the case in Knox County. Wasn't the case in Saunders County. But the commissioners and supervisors in Knox County, they listened to the voters. The voters didn't want them. They didn't want 155, 600-foot wind towers in that county, uneconomically producing electricity. They responded, and the county banned them. And your counties can do it too. You can find, Resolution 2025-19, Knox County. You take it to your county commissioners, say, we want this in our county. Yeah, like I said, without the generous federal subsidies, wind and solar would never exist. Warren Buffett, now, one of the greatest capitalists in the history of America, so he knows what he's talking about. So, and last slide, lessons learned. What do you value? So what is value? This is a book. This is a little 5 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. The author is Sabin Willett, a Harvard law lawyer, went to Harvard College. He was in the same class of one of my classmates at Creighton Prep. And they were both English majors. But he wrote this really good book, Present Value, 2003. And the premise here is an economics professor at Amherst. And he says, so last class of the semester, he says, what is value? Let me propose a definition. After 40 years in this field, I found it profoundly disparaging, although unfortunately accurate. The definition of value in economics is the precise opposite of real value. That is, economic value is only that which has no intrinsic commerce at all. It's only commerce, intrinsic content at all. It's only commerce, only process. So you're all in the business to make money, but it's more than that. It's about your family, it's about your lifestyle. It's, you're out there. We have Indian summer days in Nebraska. I'm sure you do, of course, in Oklahoma or in South Dakota. And you're out there and you think, oh man, it's great to be alive. I'm out doing what I'm doing. I'm out in nature. And that's a great thing. That you can't put a number on it, but it's important. And that's what this Amherst fictional professor in this book was saying. And then Ann Althouse, she is a retired law professor at the University of, from the University of Wisconsin. Rush Limbaugh used to read her blog. I read her blog every day. And she's a high-level intellectual and a wonderful writer. But recently she wrote about President Trump's aesthetic sense. And this is what she wrote. And I was thinking about this as I was driving Highway 12 through Nebraska and then up into South Dakota. These places, South Dakota, they are beautiful in our mind and imagination and need to be kept beautiful. So I'll leave you with this. Keep your South Dakota beautiful. That is an important thing. So do we have any time for questions, or did I go over? Or any questions from anyone? Okay, we're there.
One of the things I'm surprised that you haven't mentioned is hydroelectric and thermoelectric. I worked on some of those projects, and I think that's the cheapest, greenest energy we got.
Well, with hydroelectric, I mean, the Lewis and Clark Dam does supply power, but it's just not that much. We don't have that many locations that you can do it with. It's just, pardon? Well, yeah, but you got to find some body of water to dam up. And Lewis and Clark Lake is one example. I'm not an expert on it. I just, and I know the Niobrara River generates a little bit of hydro, but the most economically efficient is coal, oil, nat gas, and nuclear. And nuclear has a long lead time, and that's going to take some while. But right now, I mean, GE Vernova is a big builder of gas turbines, and they have like a 7-year waiting list for these gas turbines. I mean, for these data centers, they're going whole hog. Well, that's another interesting thing. You know, Facebook and the rest of them, Amazon, they were all committed to net zero. Well, now that they've got this AI going, they kind of put that to the side, and you know they're trying to partner with some new nuke plants. Constellation Energy is one, but also, I mean, they're building these nat gas turbine plants. North Dakota is building a giant one. And, you know, they have the nat gas. I want to say it's like a $10 billion project, maybe more up there in North Dakota. So, you know, technically speaking, nat gas is not carbon neutral, but they need the power more than they need the virtue signal. Any other questions?
Thank you for coming. I was at that June 11th meeting in Knox County with Senator Lauren Nelson in South Dakota, and congratulations on that win. That was so phenomenal to see a group of men vote down and stand up to a big corporation like NextEra. It was quite refreshing, and thank you for all your guidance. We are battling a wind farm in the southeastern part of South Dakota right now, and they have been given the consumer use permit in our county. Is there any repercussions? Is there anything we can do to stop it? They haven't moved 1 ounce of dirt, not anything. Is there any way that the new big beautiful bill may prevent that from happening?
I would say probably not. Well, and I want one minor correction. NextEra is not building in Knox County. It's now Geronimo Power, formerly known as National Grid Renewables. They were a subsidiary of a UK public utility company, but they sold themselves to a Canadian company. You know, these are financial transactions, but I know Nebraska law, and that's what I've done in Lancaster County. The Lancaster County Board approved a solar permit, and under Nebraska law, you can appeal to the district court, but it's time driven. So, you know, we had 30 days, and we're in litigation on that. And I'm grateful for that because I'll have a neutral judge. Yeah, and a side note, all the Lancaster County judges recuse themselves because it's a political hot potato, which is fine. But, you know, a neutral judge said, yeah, county board made a political decision, but they still have to follow the law, and that's the basis of our appeal. But again, I'm not a South Dakota lawyer, so I just kind of doubt, you know, once that permit is granted, but, you know, if there's a will, there's a way. And I guess your commissioners or whoever approved that permit, they had their reasons, you know. And I don't begrudge the landowners, you know. Who wouldn't want 3 to 5 times the cash rent for 20, 30 years and you're just cashing the checks? I mean, but, you know, you got to look at the bigger picture. You got to look at your neighbors and, you know, really do the right thing. So that's my response.
Okay, we're running out of time here, so thank you so much for coming. We appreciate it.